Okay, hello. My name is Amber Holowicki, and this is my second informative speech for the semester. So this one, I will be talking about both sides of the climate change argument, the consensus and the minority. And I will be giving three arguments for each of them, and I will be also be giving my opinion on each of those. So let's do that. So the first side I'm going to be doing is for the consensus view. I will be arguing three arguments for that. And essentially what the consensus view is that they are arguing that humans are emitting a vast amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, so much so that it is changing the world's climate, and that it is causing global temperature increase all around the world, and that humans are the driving factor behind that cause. So the printer downstairs was evil and did not let me print out my slides, so I will just be showing the graphs that the images I did use for the PowerPoint. So the first argument I'm going to be presenting is the hockey stick graph. I'm actually going to be showing that for both the minority and the consensus because they have vastly differing opinions on one singular graph. And I'll be talking about both sides of the opinion and then what I think on that. So this top one is for the consensus. This is the consensus's view. This is what the consensus use when they're advocating for the hockey stick graph. So essentially what the hockey stick graph is that it is a temperature predicting graph that was created by the climatologist Michael Mann. And the consensus say that Michael Mann used only one data set to produce these results. He used tree ring data to show that the global temperatures have vastly been increasing over time compared to the 1400s all the way over here. Vastly increasing. The consensus say that this is a very valid and reliable source of data to show that temperature is increasing, and it is very, very real. It is happening according to this data set. So in the second argument, I'm going to be proposing, I'm going to give my opinion on all arguments at the end of a little consensus area, is for extreme weather. So the consensus, like I said earlier, they're saying that global temperatures are increasing, and it is mainly caused and driven by human emitted CO2. And they are due to these higher temperature elevation levels, extreme weather such as like higher rainfall, droughts, snowfall, tornadoes, hurricanes, all those types of extreme weather events and natural disasters are increasing dramatically according to the consensus view, and this bottom graph shows that. This top one shows like tornado levels. This bottom one is actually tornadoes, the amount of days that have had 30 or more tornadoes occur. Sorry, stuttered there. And you can clearly see this over here is nearly zero 30 or more tornadoes in a day, and it is vastly increased over time. Vast jump between now and back then. So the consensus view argues that due to increased temperature, more natural disasters are occurring, which will lead to drastic economic loss, infrastructure, lives being lost. They are using this evidence to show that it's happening and we need to deal with it, or else we will have vastly loss of life or economic issues. And the last argument I'm going to be presenting is for the 97% consensus. Essentially, the 97% consensus is that the consensus show vast amounts of data from surveys and experiments saying that over 97% of scientists agree with the argument that human-caused climate change is happening. This graphic that I pulled from the internet, I looked it up, I linked it, all that kind of stuff. These show vastly more surveys and data and experiments that were done than the two we talked about in class. Not a singular data set here is below 90%, which I thought was really interesting. So the consensus used these arguments from these specific surveys and experiments to prove that their point that the leading focus and people in the climate change industry are saying this is true. They know much more than we do about the topic, so we should listen to them. And if the vast majority of them are saying this, who are we to prove them wrong, is what the consensus view is arguing for. So that's all the arguments for the consensus view. I think they definitely have some strong points, especially with the extreme weather, and the 97% consensus. If the normal person just looked at that and like, oh yeah, that's right, without looking into anything, they would probably agree with that. But I do think the minority poses a stronger case, and I'm going to get into that now. If I can get it, there we go. So going back to the hockey stick graph, which is I'm going to do the minority's opinion on this one because it's so vastly different than the consensus. So the minority says that the hockey stick graph is complete and utter bogus. It is not a reliable source at all. And that is because while the consensus claim that Michael Mann only used one data set to produce this data up here, in reality, after doing some digging, they discovered that he completely fudged the data and put much more weight into that tree ring data set, which is actually an extremely unreliable source of information. And while this data set right here is pretty much the same, they discovered that really Michael Mann's data set near the end shows a decrease in temperature globally. So what he did was that he took thermometer data set, which is a data claiming, which is, and put that over the tree ring data set to show that there is actually an increase in data as opposed to what his tree ring data set was showing. So essentially he cherry picked and fudged the data set to prove and coincide with the consensus's claim, which is, and the amount of controversy that one graph sparked is so much. So it's like, it's just insane how much controversy, death threats even go around that one data set. And the next two graphs, next two slides kind of go hand in hand. So I'm going to like talk about them a little bit together. But the minority view also argue against the consensus view in the sense that most of the data sets that the consensus view advocate for are climate models, and the minority view has shown several times that climate models are very, very false and very, very unreliable due to data fudging and cherry picking and other aspects. One of the aspects is called the urban heat island effect, which basically means that the consensus view is taking data from temperature reading devices that are very, very close to urban areas. And those urban areas make the air around it naturally hotter. So the data that they input into those models and graphs are obviously going to be much, much hotter than actually is, because due to the asphalt, gas, all that kind of stuff. So because of that, the minority is saying, of course, the data is going to be much hotter because of all of these different factors, one of which being the urban heat island effect. And the minority view is also showing that due to all that data being hotter, in reality, the actual data the consensus view does not show is actually much, much cooler than what the consensus shows. This data right here shows the what's it called? Sorry, medieval warm period, which is much, much hotter than this little bump right over here, which is actually where we are. This is vastly, vastly much higher. And in reality, we're only slightly above average. We are not that much higher above average, especially compared to this, which is who knows how much hotter. Like, I can't do that math, but it's much hotter than what we currently are. And the world was fine after that. People thrived during that era. We're still here hundreds of years later, and this graph shows that, and people are like, oh, we're gonna die because it's getting much, much hotter, even though in reality, it's not that much hotter at all. So the minority is saying that yes, global warming is happening but is much, much smaller than what the consensus view is saying. And even though humans are releasing CO2 into the atmosphere, it is not to the extent at all. It does not cause as much damage as the consensus view is advocating for. If anything, we might even be in a carbon deficit, according to some. So I more so agree with the minority. I do think some of their stuff is a little, some of the stuff I don't quite agree with. But overall, I more so lean to the minority view, mainly because of all the data fudging and cherry picking that has been found in the consensus view, just to support their opinion. It's not science if you're just lying and saying this. It's not science really. But yeah, I definitely more so agree with the minority view, and that is all. Thank you.